Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the People on the Go Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Melissa, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. Before we get started, let's check and make sure that you can see the screen and hear me. If you can please use the questions panel on the right side of your screen to type a brief note indicating that you can hear me and see the screen, that would be great. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. By the way, this is the same questions panel that we'll use for questions later at the end of the presentation. Of course, if anything comes up during the presentation, feel free to ask as well, and I'll try my best to answer you. If you're having technical difficulty, the number is on the bottom there for you to call, 1-800-263-6317. Today's webinar is Negotiating Team Conflicts Productively, and I have with me Eugene Delon, who I'll be introducing in just a minute. A quick background about why we have these sessions, especially for those who are with us for the first time. We have these sessions because at People on the Go, our focus is productivity in the workplace, and the topics that you see on the screen are the topics that we cover. And we have them available in a variety of formats, including the webinar format, just like today's session. The webinars are offered on a monthly basis, and you can check them out on the website, and there's the URL right there for you, people-onthego.com/webinars. We have a membership program that makes these webinars very easy to take advantage of as well. And we also have many resources available, like the blog, Facebook, and LinkedIn groups, and you can also follow our founder, Pierre Khawand, on Twitter. And so now let's dive into today's topic, negotiating team conflicts productively. Our speaker, Eugene Delon, Doctor of Psychology, is the founder and president of Delon Consulting Incorporated. As a bilingual licensed psychologist, organizational consultant, and coach with over 25 years combined experience, he has provided direct clinical services, led healthcare facilities, and worked internationally, including in the war zones of Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting senior executives in the defense, aerospace, IT, and nuclear service industries. Eugene combines his knowledge of general and social psychology with his considerable corporate experience to help both large and small organizations negotiate a broad array of challenges. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Eugene. This transition is going to take just one moment.
Show my screen. Hello.
Hi, Eugene.
Are we ready?
Yes, we are. I'm going to see if, oh yes, it's popping up now. Wonderful.
Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to jump right in because we don't have a lot of time. We're talking today about negotiating team conflicts productively, and I'm going to talk a lot about conflict in general, and oftentimes it's going to seem like I'm talking about a dyad, but in truth, a lot of the techniques and things that I'm talking about are applied to teams as well, and sometimes are a little more complicated because there are many more variables when you have many more people. With that frame, I'd like to start by asking you just for a second to think about what makes a team, and really what do you mean by conflict? And I have here a definition for team, and you know, you can have a bunch of people sitting in a theater. That doesn't necessarily make it a team. You can have a bunch of people who are on a sales team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a real team, because they're all measured, you know, independently in terms of their success. That doesn't quite make them a team either. But when their successes are kind of pooled, now you begin to see that there's a lot of high degree of interdependence. And on a team, people share authority, responsibility, and are accountable at the end of the day for that collective performance. And the other thing I think that's really important in terms of the definition for team here is that people have a common goal, and again, as I said before, shared rewards. Along those lines, I wanted to just briefly talk about conflict. because conflicts can happen for all kinds of reasons. But I think the most important part of understanding what the word conflict means in this context is that there's a friction, or there's opposing views, or incompatibilities in terms of people coming together, or vision, or things of that sort. More specifically, what people tend to kind of fight about are, or sometimes they don't even realize they're fighting about, are their values and mindsets. You know, certain people can kind of get stuck in a particular way of doing things. That's their mindset about the right way. And somebody else comes along and they've had successes with another way. And so there you have it. Two people who both had successful experiences in the past think that the right way forward is their way, and there comes the conflict. There can also be issues around goals, expectations, needs. People can conflict around roles. That's my job. No, that's my job. Or there's not enough money. There's not enough people. And oftentimes, those kinds of boiling pots, you know, when there's not enough resources, people can get quite ugly at times. Also, sometimes not having enough process or systems or structure in place can lead to a lot of confusion. Again, that can lead to conflict. And lastly, sometimes, depending on where we come from, we have different styles of communication. As a former native New Yorker, I can tell you when I first moved to San Francisco some 20-something years ago, I had quite a few experiences. You know, in New York, a four-letter word is considered a term of endearment, and here in San Francisco, not so much. So again, for all kinds of reasons, people can have conflicts. I think what's important to understand is that in terms of a team, that conflict is necessary and it's normal. And if you look here in front of me, Tuckman's famous model of how teams progress, you know, you come together and you form as a team for all different kinds of reasons. But then there's that step that I have in there, the stage called storming. I've bolded it because storming really implies that there's going to be competition, that relationships are going to be strained. People are going to challenge the leader, tension, differences. People don't know yet, you know, whether or not the team can tolerate these things. So there's a lot of uncomfortableness. People are trying to decide, you know, how autonomous can I be, or is the leader going to control, or is somebody else going to try to control? People are trying to kind of show that they have something to contribute. Again, there's how are we going to make decisions? Is the leader going to make them on their own? So there's all these unknowns, and so this period is kind of rife or full of potential in terms of conflict. And again, very, very normal, because how you resolve a lot of the questions around these particular needs at the end of the day is going to make the difference in terms of whether or not you actually get to that place of really performing at your highest potential. So with that in mind, I also want to say that it's important to recognize that conflict is a good thing. I've worked on teams where people don't express conflict, and I can tell you that people don't bring their best game when they're constantly avoiding conflict. If you're either avoiding it because you're afraid of the leader, or avoiding it because you don't want to upset the customer, at the end of the day, I think what happens is, you know, like an espresso, there's no froth. So the good stuff doesn't rise to the top. And very specifically, you know, if you think about society in general, you know, major conflicts have led to countries kind of becoming democratic, or whatever it might be. But the point is here is that's very important. Social scientists, you know, have discovered that when couples fight, sometimes that also leads to good passion. And so again, sometimes without the fighting, you never really get to the cohesion and the intimacy. And so again, so people don't really feel connected. Also, I think that conflict can lead to innovation, because with people throwing out ideas and kind of having at it, sometimes something new kind of gets born out of that. And so again, I'm not going to, you can read the rest of the slide, but conflict is an important part of any relationship, and especially so on a team if you really want to get to a place of cohesion. Now, that said, there's different types of conflicts, and what I'll tell you is that not all conflicts are the same. Some of them can be quite destructive. You know, I've seen people who have literally changed careers because they got into a conflict where they lost confidence, they lost self-esteem, and really a real genuine hurt, injury that caused them to kind of change directions altogether. So I think in the context of teams and organizations, it's important to try and stay more in the functional or constructive kinds of conflicts. And really what that means is that you're focusing more on what the issue is versus the person. And hard thing to do, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But also, I think realistic versus non-realistic conflicts. You know, again, if you're genuinely fighting over resources or values or things of that sort, you know, that's something that is concrete, that you can actually write down and look at and deal with. But when you start to deal with prejudices and people who just want to win at all costs, that's not realistic in that sometimes people who approach conflict in that way are really not going to be willing or able to I think, engage in a productive dialogue, because again, the end goal is to win at all costs. Or if there's a prejudice that's really strong, it's going to be hard to get past that. So with that said, I'm going to move now into, you know, how do we manage team conflicts? Some of you have probably heard of Daniel Goleman, and I think a big part of managing conflict is that you kind of have to work toward helping each individual team member to work on their own conflict management skills. And in my mind, a big part of managing conflict is self-management, how you manage yourself. But before you can manage yourself, you have to really kind of know yourself. If you don't know what your triggers are, if you don't realize how you're coming across, again, whatever you are not aware of, you can't manage. So a big part of team management in terms of conflict is that as a leader or as a person who's helping to facilitate the dialogue, you have to think of and create ways of helping people to kind of recognize what they're bringing to the table. You know, and sometimes what we bring to the table is not something that's active, it's something that's passive. So what I mean by that is if I don't speak up, you know, the conflict is that I missed the opportunity there. So my contribution was that I sat on what I was really feeling and thinking. So again, we want to help people to grow their self-awareness in the interest of then helping them to self-manage. If you're aware of something, now you can make different kinds of choices around how you manage yourself. And then that kind of leads to and builds on in terms of social awareness. A big part of managing relationships and managing teams and managing conflict is that you kind of have to open your eyes and recognize that there's a lot of communication going on. So paying attention to cues in terms of people's language, paying attention to the politics that may be playing out. All of those things are variables that kind of can influence the outcome. And as you get better at being aware of all of those influences from the environment, and you get better at managing yourself, then you will get better at managing the relationships, managing the conflicts on a particular team. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to kind of become aware that when there's conflict, very often, you know, especially if it's intense conflict, what happens is that we all kind of default to a biological thing called the acute stress response, also known as the fright, fight, or flight phenomenon. And it really, this phenomenon is something that's hardwired. It's about survival. And the important thing that I really want you to understand about this has to do with the screen that I've just put up, this slide, which really is speaking to the brain. Because when you're in a conflict, whether it's on a team or individual, if it's really heated, there's a really good chance that a little part right over here called the amygdala, which in a way, I kind of think about it like a file, a card catalog of all the memories that potentially have scared you in the past or that have excited you. All those extreme emotions kind of get cataloged there. So when something kind of remotely resembles it, this phenomenon kicks in so that you can protect yourself. And it's helped us to survive through the ages. But in a work environment, in a team environment, it isn't always appropriate. So again, if you get up and run out of the conference room, people will look at you like you're crazy. And if you kind of get into a fisticuffs, people will look at you like you're crazy as well. Again, that does happen, but that generally means that this mechanism for survival has really kind of overridden this part over here where you have the frontal lobe. It actually kind of sort of turns off when you're in a really deep, heated kind of conflict. And the reason why it turns off is because if you stop to think too much when you're in the middle of a conflict, it's too late. by that point the saber-tooth, would have eaten you, or that car would have hit you. Instead, what you need to do is react. So you veer out of the way when you're on the freeway and something comes at you. Again, important, necessary mechanism for our survival, not always the best thing in the work environment. And so the trick to kind of managing yourself and managing team conflicts is, how do you help yourself and how do you help others to kind of bypass or manage this mechanism? Because if that's going on, you're not even able to process information. So people who are trying to appeal to your logic really can't get there, because the adrenaline and cortisol have kind of flooded your brain and moved into all of the places in your body that basically have geared you up, again, to fight or take flight. So just to kind of give you a sense of what those physiological responses look like, I want you to understand that heart rate goes up, blood pressure, your muscles tighten again so that you can run or so you can fight. Butterflies in your stomach, because remember, what happens is when this mechanism gets kicked in, all the other systems in your body shut down. So often people get butterflies in your stomach, means that the stomach has stopped processing. At the same time, people begin to sweat because their body's heating up, their pupils dilate so they can focus on the perceived threat. Strong desire to evacuate, and I don't necessarily mean the room. I also mean because your stomach and digestive system has shut down. Sometimes people will poop or pee themselves. Again, I think there's a survival part to that. If you don't smell very appetizing, the saber-toothed tiger won't eat you, or you lighten the load in terms of being able to be agile or run and things of that sort. Even your immune system mobilizes. So this how it's there in case you have an injury. You don't perceive pain, and you've all heard stories of people who've been in accidents where a part of their body has been severed, and in the immediate seconds afterward, they're not even aware, because the body kind of takes over, and so that you can kind of survive that moment. And heightened senses, again, to scan the environment, and those are all the kinds of things that happen physically. But then, as I've already said, the brain also is not able to shut down, to process logic and things of that sort. So right in the moment when you're in that heat of that conflict, that's the very moment when you're not really able to be rational and have a conversation that processes data. And so both persons, if both are triggered, are severely compromised and are not able to genuinely have the conversation, even if they want to. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So how do you manage this? You manage this in many, 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 many ways, and here are just a few. But I can tell you that some of these are things that you may have heard in your childhood. When the school teacher said, count to 10 and calm down, you're kind of re-engaging your thinking, logical brain. When you count or you do any kind of mathematics or any kind of thing that kind of re-engages that thinking part of your brain is really helpful. The deep breathing is another thing, because it literally changes the physiology of your body. And I'm not talking about deep breathing from your chest. That actually can make things worse if you think of kind of like hyperventilating. I'm talking about if you put your hand right now on your belly and you take a deep belly breath, almost so that your belly sticks out, think diaphragm, and then slowly, slowly exhale, that begins to kind of change the response of your body to that threat, so that, again, you can re-engage with that part of your brain. The timeout, we do it with children all the time, but in truth, it's also a technique that's used in labor relations. Anything that I've kind of participated in, when it gets heated, very often it's important to, somebody has to be rational and say, let's go and take a coffee break, or let's go for a walk around the block. So a timeout for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, a day, sometimes 4 days, depends on how excited people are. Sometimes that time out can be helpful and help you, again, to step back from the cliff, do some rational thinking about how to move forward in a way that will be productive, and in a way that will engage and help you to get to the outcome that you want to get to. So think about that in terms of a team. If people are really, really passionate about something in a way that's becoming destructive, sometimes it's better to say, we're tabling this. and we're going to come back to it in a few days. And in the meantime, I want you all to think about, maybe how you've behaved, and I want you to think about, what are we really trying to accomplish here? And I'll speak a little bit more about that. Creative visualization, and that's basically something that Olympic athletes often use, where you sit and you visualize the outcome that you want, how you're going to be feeling when you have that outcome, the thoughts that might be going through your head, how you're going to be standing. And creative visualization is also, I think, something you can use in terms of calming yourself down. And we've often heard, in movies or even in real life, people will say, now go to your happy place. And so doing some thinking beforehand about what's the kind of place that helps you to relax. Is it sitting in a lounge chair, on the beach, having a pina colada? Sometimes really kind of visualizing that and thinking about the taste of that colada and the breeze on the beach, so you have that and you've practiced it enough that in a moment of stress where you feel you're going to be triggered, you can take a moment and kind of take yourself to that place, so you can again step back from a moment when you're reacting versus reflecting and being conscious and making conscious choices. And of course, our fear of conflict is a problem, because if we avoid it, we never get better at it. Like anything else, you get better at conflict by engaging it. And so rather than avoiding conflict on a team, you have to engage it. And sometimes it's helpful to engage conflict by establishing the ground rules up front. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. But again, practice and repetition, very, very important. I want to just say something about active listening. I consider it to be kind of the miracle cure. And what I mean by that is that sometimes it's not just about us managing ourselves. It's, especially in the context of a team, it's about managing the other. And the way to manage the other when somebody else is escalated is really, really, really to tune into what they're saying and helping them to feel that you really, really, really are getting their point of view. And I'm saying that you're getting it, not that you agree with it. You don't have to agree with it. But if you can, again, focus in on the content of what they're saying and in some way reflect back what they're feeling, I think very often that helps people to feel respected and valued, that you took the time to really understand what it was that they had to say or what they were feeling. So keep that in mind, because in those difficult moments, if you move into a posture of listening, again, and you kind of let go of what your next move or your next thought is going to be, and just really focus in on giving that person that experience of non-judgment and really of seeking to understand them, I think you'll find that you'll be able to get through that difficult moment. But let me come here for a second. Here we go. A couple of other things came up on the slide. Lastly, paraphrase, open-ended questions. But again, you can read the rest of that slide yourselves later, because I want to be mindful of time. The other thing I want to say is that a lot of us, because of our previous experiences with conflict, kind of come to conflict with almost like a predetermined posture. And in truth, we all have access to all 5 of these different potential ways of dealing with conflict, but we all have a preferred style. And so, I don't want to make, any generalizations, but I will, and say that depending on whether you're Northeast or, or you're California, whether you're North or South, different cultures, even as a person who is Latino myself, my culture in general tends to be conflict avoidant, so recognizing that for all kinds of reasons, we come to conflict in a different posture. Again, and while all 5 of these are essential sometimes, and while we have access to all 5 of these, every single one of us has a default one. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this today, but what I will tell you is that you're doing some thinking about this in terms of what your default mode might be, can be really helpful. And if you joined us for the longer webinar, which is occurring, I think, next month, I'm going to have an assessment instrument where you can answer some questions, and at the end of that, you'll have a sense for what your default mode might be. And so, in particular, I want to just highlight that when you approach a conflict from a win-lose dynamic, that only makes it even worse. Because nobody wants to be the loser. And when you approach it from that win kind of mindset, very often we lose contact with our ethics and with our values. It kind of all gets overridden by this desire to win. So again, I would encourage you to do some thinking about that, because again, when you get to that place where it's all about winning, what ends up happening is that the underlying message is that you don't really care about the relationship. And so again, but all 5 of these are helpful and are useful depending on the situation. I'll just kind of give an example. If you look at this avoider mode, I use that one all the time, but I'm using it in a conscious way, and I use it also depending on what the issue is. So, in my relationship with my spouse, there are some issues that are just not worth it. I often have said to people that I've worked with, you can be right, meaning you can win, or you can be happy. And so you kind of have to make choices sometimes. How important is this issue to me? And if it's not, then don't worry. It's not important to be right. What's important is to be happy. And so again, I would encourage you, and there's the source of where I got this from is here. And on the bottom, I would encourage you to again, look up. There are some online free inventories as well if you don't want to wait until the next seminar. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is like just some bullets on how to manage discussions effectively, but I'm going to go into a little more detail in just a couple of seconds. So just first and foremost, I'm going to recap that a big part of managing, team conflict effectively is that you have to manage your own feelings and behavior effectively. And I'll underscore that you can't hold someone accountable around their behavior if you're not managing yours either. And so this idea, again, of emotional intelligence, you got to, again, let go of the win-lose dynamic, and I would go one step further and say that sometimes we have to let go of the outcome. That sometimes the process is actually more important. Can we have this discussion in a way where we respect each other so that the relationship is intact at the end? And that's really important on a team, because just like in a marriage, that person's not going anywhere. And so you're going to have to deal with them tomorrow. And when we don't treat people with respect, what happens is that people kind of start keeping tally. Okay, you won this one, but that was the battle. The war is tomorrow. Again, using the active listening and try to address people's feelings. Again, remember, feelings are never wrong. They're not always rational, but they're never wrong. And so sometimes just acknowledging it can be really helpful. And using open-ended questions. An open-ended question is really something to the effect of, help me to understand how you got to that point. Tell me more about that. Very open. Versus, are you okay? Yes, no. What color is it? Red, blue. That's a closed question. That doesn't really engender having a conversation where someone is really kind of telling you their story. That sometimes, if you use too many closed questions, it can begin to feel like an interrogation. Seek first to understand the other's feelings, thoughts, wants, and needs. Again, when you put the other first, they feel respected and valued, and more often than not, the law of reciprocity will say that they will do the same for you. Rather than being certain, we never know what really drives someone's behavior. Move to a posture of curiosity. Again, help me to understand. And again, using I statements. If I say to someone, "You pissed me off," usually that's heard as a threat in some kind of a way, or "You're wrong." I could say, "I am feeling pissed off," or I can say, I come to a different conclusion than you, because when you tell someone that they're wrong, again, that's kind of like telling someone they're a loser. You're going to get some pushback. So if you make it an I statement in terms of what your reality is, no one can argue with your reality. That's your perception. That's your truth. And truth is in the eye of the beholder at the end of the day. And the other thing I'll say is just to remember that intent does not always equal impact. And what I'll say about that is this, is that works in both ways. So give other people the benefit of the doubt. Just because they're looking aggressive doesn't mean they intended to be aggressive. Just because it looks like they overlooked you doesn't mean that was the intention. Again, that law of reciprocity, if you can give people that benefit of the doubt, more often than not, they will do it for you as well. Then I want to share with you just something from a book called Crucial Conversations. And at the top here, the header says, retrace your path. In terms of managing yourself, I think it's important, and I think cognitive psychology will tell you that sometimes the problem is not what's actually happened. It's what happens with the information or our interpretation or the thoughts that we're having related to a particular incident. So you don't say hello, and then in my mind, I see and hear that you didn't say hello, and I tell myself a story. This person is uppity, and they think they're better than everybody else, and then I begin to feel bad, and then next thing you know, I ignore you, the next time you walk by, or I badmouth you to somebody. And so sometimes it's that story, the way that we connect the dots, and that's a tendency that we as humans have. We try and make sense of things, and that's been helpful to us, over the ages. But sometimes the way we connect the dots is not necessarily the right way or the truth, our interpretation of it. And so part of managing yourself sometimes is that we got to go backwards. Okay, I behaved this way. What was I feeling? What was the conversation going on in my head? And what was it that led me to have that conversation? And then, I would ask myself, is it possible that there could be a different interpretation here? And I promise you that more often than not, there could be 20 different interpretations. And we kind of stirred ourselves up by kind of this story that we created that maybe took something that was innocuous, or maybe a small slight, and turned it into a big one because of the story that we've told ourselves. And so very important here in terms of how we manage ourselves. And again, for more on this, I would recommend that you check out this book. There is a corollary here in terms of how you show up for other people. And remember, I said first you want to focus on the other, but I think, again, sometimes in order for us to manage ourselves first before we can manage somebody else, because if we're really escalated, we won't be able to do the things that I put up on this slide. But here it goes. Basically, what I would say is that ask the person, again, seek to understand, mirror them. And what I mean by that is saying, this looks like it's hard for you. If it looks like they're struggling with it, or you look upset, hey, you're angry, I can understand, why you would be angry. Again, doesn't mean that you agree. Paraphrase. And by priming, basically what I mean is this. By priming, I mean that sometimes people won't feel comfortable, but you can tell that, hey, it looks like you're upset. Do you want to talk about it? And so again, that's what I mean by priming, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, being mindful of the time. So I'm going to actually move forward here. I also want to say that sometimes you can get stuck in a conversation, and there are a bunch of reasons why you could get stuck, but here are some things for you to consider. Sometimes we get stuck because everybody has a version of what happened. And some people think that they've got all the data, when the truth is that they may not have all the data. Different people have different pieces of the pie. That old exercise, you blindfold people, they all touch the elephant, and they all describe it differently. And then they all realize, oh, we were all touching the elephant. It's the same thing, in conflict. And so pause and reflect and seek to understand what the other person's point of view is, their perceptions, the information that they're holding. Remember that, again, we can't know what somebody's intentions are. Most of us figure out what the intentions are after the fact, not before, and certainly not during. And I would say, remember that in everything, it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 to tangle. To tango, I mean. And what I would say is that sometimes if we can show up to a conflict and say, hey, here's how I contributed. Here's how I made this worse. What do you think you contributed? Rather than getting into this, it's all your fault. It's never only one person's fault. Usually different people, again, contributed something, sometimes actively, sometimes passively. The other thing is feelings. Sometimes some of us have a predisposition to focus on facts, and some of us have a predisposition to focus on feelings. And what I would say is that Both elements are equally important. And sometimes we're wanting to have a fact conversation and somebody is stuck with feelings. And so you're not going to be able to have the fact conversation with them until you've addressed their feelings in a way that felt helpful. So keep that in mind. That, this is person upset. Well, I guess I better focus on feelings first, and or with yourself. Sometimes we have to say to ourselves or say to someone, you know what, I need to talk about what I'm feeling before I can engage in a conversation about facts. And then the identity, again, that sometimes our jobs, our roles, our identity gets kind of wrapped up. And so when someone says, you're wrong, what we hear is you're a lousy engineer or you're a lousy admin, or when they really meant specifically the one thing that we were, and so sometimes we have to kind of step back and kind of look at, have we in some way threatened this person's identity? Because again, until we kind of deal with that, the person may not be able to have the conversation that will help us to be productive and get to a win-win in the conversation. So I'm going to move us forward here. And these are my 6 steps for how to manage conflict productively. Establish mutual agreement to engage in a difficult conversation. And what I'll say is it's not helpful to stumble into somebody's room and say, we're going to talk about this right now, because that will surely trigger that fight or flight phenomenon. As I said before, sometimes if you know there's going to be a difficult conversation, like there's a board meeting I'm facilitating in a couple of weeks in DC, I know it's going to be heated. So we need to establish the rules of engagement up front so that people know that it's going to be safe, so that people know that it's going to be confidential, so that people know that we're going to try and talk one person at a time. Again, usually I elicit that from the group or from the team because if it's their rules, there's a greater chance that people will abide by them. Identify and agree superordinate goals and or define the conflict. And what I really want to underscore there is that don't get into the trap, and the word don't isn't the most helpful, but let me just say that a lot of us fall into the trap where we show up to a discussion with, here's the solution that I want. And I think rather than that, because then it comes, my solution is better than yours, I would encourage you to step back with the other person and define what is the real issue that we're trying to address. Because sometimes when you do that first, I think that you'll find that you can then figure out the path forward together. If you just come to the table with your solution, you're going to lose people. Again, listen to the other person, and I've already talked a lot about that. Briefly state your own needs, wants. And the last thing is that research tells us that more often than not, when you really analyze conflicts, people tend to be 75, 80% in agreement, and it's that last little bit. And so sometimes if you can talk about what are the things we agree on up front, that builds the foundation, the goodwill, the safety to have the part of the difficult conversation around the things that you don't agree on. So let me move this cursor here. This is how you sabotage a conflict, by the way. Order, dominate, judge, name-calling, use statements, blaming, avoiding emotions, avoiding conflict, define the problem in terms of solutions, and plunging impetuously into a conversation. Again, don't storm into somebody's office or home or whatever it might be and say, we're doing this now. You're, more often than not, you're going to trigger them in some way or another. And then they're going to say and do things they probably didn't mean. And you'll think, oh, see, they are a jerk, and you don't even recognize how you contributed to that dynamic. Here's another page with a more exhaustive list of all the things that I think are important in terms of managing conflict productively. And I'll just make a closing statement, and then I'll open it up to questions and answers. But here's the deal as far as I'm concerned. Again, if you're trying to manage team conflict, you have to manage yourself. And sometimes, well, all the time, you have to create the safety for people. And sometimes, though, you need to talk about how you're going to talk about a conflict. In other words, sometimes people need to develop a little bit of skills before they can have that difficult conversation. Hopefully, in the material that I've given you here, I've given you some ideas around the kinds of skills and the kinds of tools you can give to people. Thank you for joining us, and I am now going to be looking to see if there are any questions that get posted.
Great. Thank you so much, Eugene. We're going to switch it back over to my slides right now, and then we'll get into questions in just a moment. Again, thanks, Eugene, so much for sharing your insights with us today. Lots of great information there. Everyone, again, just so you know, you're going to be receiving a recording of today's presentation as well as the slides. So all that great information that was presented on, you'll be getting copies of that for your use. Again, here is Eugene's contact information if you'd like to get in touch with him. And now, before we take questions, I have a few reminders. For those who joined us later in the session, please feel free to visit our blog and join our Facebook and LinkedIn groups to stay updated on future events. And you can also follow our founder, Pierre Khawand, on Twitter, where we share information about People-on-the-Go and helpful blog articles as well, and things like that. Right now, we're having a leadership survey on our website, and there's some great prizes involved. You can see some of them there. One of them includes a free workshop membership for a year, so that's a really great one. It takes only about 10 minutes to complete it. I'm going to share the link with you right now in the chat section, so that's there for you as well. I also want to let you know about some specials that we're currently running. One of them is a special for Eugene's upcoming course, Resolving Conflicts Productively, where he will be going even deeper into the topics that he covered today. We also have creativity and innovation coming up, behavioral interviewing, project management, Google Analytics. And this is a really great deal. They're usually $125 per workshop. You can even get several seats, 5 seats for $49.95. And you can see those on our website, people-onthego.com/specials. And now you're on the air. If you could please type in your questions for Eugene in the questions panel, I will relay them to him verbally. And thank you so much for staying after everyone. We really appreciate that. This is a good question to start with. Eugene, are there differences in managing conflict among equals versus among superiors?
I would say yes and no. I think at the end of the day, there is a power differential. And because there's a power differential, I think as the person, if you're the person in power, meaning that you're the manager of the person, I think sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to make sure that it's safe for the person. Because people can sometimes feel fear that there'll be repercussions afterward. But in the ideal world, you've created an environment where it's colleague to colleague to address that kind of a conflict. Sometimes performance issues, again, if you can relate to the person colleague to colleague, I think it might actually help them to feel valued and respected and motivate them to do things differently. But if it's more of an interpersonal kind of a thing, I especially think that it's important to try and create a dynamic of equal to equal.
Great, thanks so much for that, Eugene. Someone had asked this during the presentation. You referenced a work by Tuckman.
Yes.
Do you have a little bit more information on that I could share, just so people can find that online?
Yeah, if you just Google Tuckman stages of team development, you'll get a Wikipedia page and tons of other stuff. His model has been around for a long time, but it is the prevailing model of team development still today. Forming, storming, norming, performing. So again, very easy to find. And if his name is on my slide, Tucman. But if you even put in stages of team development, it's going to come up even without his name.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
This is a good one. The conflict in my group is the conflict my group is currently facing is that some see the group as a team and others do not. Our leaders want us to function as a team. How would I navigate through this conflict?
A couple of different things. One of them is that sometimes you need to bring in somebody from the outside, and that's kind of what I often do is that people bring me in, because if you're a part of the conflict, facilitating it can kind of, again, people need that person who doesn't have any biases to be able to negotiate it. But in terms of, I think you kind of have to look at the variables of what constitutes a group and what constitutes a team. If you look back at slide that I had in terms of the definition of teams, you could maybe sit together with the people and kind of do like a mini assessment. Do we meet this criterion, that criterion, that criterion? And that could be helpful. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you don't meet the criterion that you don't want to work as a team. You may still want to work as a team. But if you have people who don't want to work as a team, the leader kind of has to make some decisions, I think, in that kind of a scenario around what it is that their vision is for the team, and then work to move the group of people in that direction. But again, if you look at that teaming slide, you can have a conversation around whether or not you meet those different criterions.
Great. This is a really good one. Which is the best method to act if someone else clearly does not want to quote unquote fight fairly?
You know, it depends on whether or not there's a power differential. If there's a power differential, you know, sometimes you have to kind of walk very, very carefully. And sometimes you may need to elicit the help of an ally, someone that you trust at the same level or HR. You know, but if it's you know, peer-to-peer, you know, kind of conflict, I think that assertion. And if you look at the sheet that I had in terms of the 5 different postures that you could probably take, you really want to strive for that collaborating. Another way of looking at that is that you want to assert yourself. I think that the minute that you kind of begin to fight dirty as well, I think you kind of reinforce the other person. So sometimes by your kind of maintaining your decorum, you asserting yourself and being respectful, you know, the other person will come around, you know, because especially in a group, in a team kind of dynamic, if the people in the team see that this person is kind of, you know, misbehaving and you're managing yourself well, more often than not, the team member might feel some pressure to kind of manage themselves more effectively. But again, it's a hard one. But I wouldn't encourage you not to. I would encourage you not to play dirty, because again, I think once you start playing dirty as well, you really have no ground to kind of have the conversation with the person about their behavior, because you're doing it as well.
That's very good. Everyone, thank you so much for your questions. I think we're going to finish up on this last one here. How do you help people take accountability without them feeling accused or attacked?
Um, you know, as a person who's been a leader myself of teams and organizations, it often helps if you can model the behavior that you want to see yourself. And I talked a little bit earlier about approaching a conversation with, here's what I've contributed, and you know, laying it on the table. You know, maybe I should have spoken up sooner. You know, maybe I, you know, got too excited. You know, I think when we own our contribution, more often than not, it gives people the opportunity to step up and own theirs as well. You know, but asking the question, you know, is there anything you think you could have done differently? Is there anything that you think you might have contributed? You know, here's what I've contributed. You know, and unfortunately, you can't force someone. And you know, I'd have to understand the individual themselves to see what the barrier is to them going there. You know, again, some people are so invested in winning that they become blinded. They lose sight of their values. They lose sight of their ethics. So again, there's no one way of managing that. But again, I would start with being a good role model around the behaviors that you want to see yourself.
Well, thank you again, Eugene. A lot of helpful information today was presented. Everyone, if you have more questions, please feel free to contact Eugene, and I encourage you to check out his upcoming webinar. Again, please feel free to take our leadership survey. And thank you so much again for joining us today. I'm going to be signing off now. When I do, you're going to receive a feedback form. If you could also please fill that out, we greatly appreciate it. It helps us improve upon what we do here. Thank you again so much to everyone and Eugene, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.